Thank you so much. And for those folks who are standing, I'd ask you to all come forward and take a seat. I have the distinct honor of introducing our next speaker. She has spent the last 20 years working internationally and domestically as a leading national advocate for women, immigrants, civil and human rights. Now she serves in Washington as a member of Congress. Congresswoman Jayapal represents Washington's 7th District, which encompasses most of Seattle and surrounding areas, including Shoreline, Vashon Island, Lake Forest Park, Edmonds, and parts of Normandy Park. Congresswoman Jayapal's work has focused on ensuring that every resident of the district has economic opportunity, fairness and equity, and safe and healthy communities. I want everyone actually to take a moment last week that there was on the House floor looking at a video that went viral. And I was home with my husband on my Facebook feed, and she popped up. She is a dynamo and can take down Don Young any day of the week. Now, for those who didn't have the distinct honor of seeing Don Young basically tell the congresswoman she didn't know much, and her eloquent response back, I would urge all of you to see it. She is a hero of mine. We invited her here because she knows so much. She knows so much, and we are thrilled to have her here with all of us. She's the first Indian American woman in the U.S. House of Representatives, and we are proud to have her speak here today. Please join in welcoming Congressman Jayapal.
Wow, thank you so much. I don't think I should speak. I already got the standing ovation. I'm just going to leave right now. Let's give it up for Kim and your leadership. Thank you so much. And thank you for that fabulous introduction. It is so good to be back here. I have the distinct honor of representing the 7th Congressional District. Everyone says that they represent the best district, but I'm just saying I really do represent the best district. And Denny Heck and others can fight with me on that. But to the Blue-Green Alliance, let me say that what you're doing, uniting labor, environment, responsible business, and community organizations is absolutely essential because we know that it really is within those intersections and with the voices of frontline communities that we are going to find our most effective solutions and harness the most power to actually be able to take on the polluters and climate deniers. For those of you from other states, welcome to the great state of Washington. We are really proud of the work that we do, and I want to give a huge shout out because even as labor unions are being attacked across the country, we are proud in Washington state to have one of the strongest labor unions in the country. Jeff Johnson, thank you for your leadership. And let's not forget, the labor movement is the reason that we have the highest minimum wage in the country tied to inflation. So thank you. And also on addressing climate change, we obviously have a governor who I'm proud to be speaking right before he does, but a governor whose top passion is the environment and has been a climate champion in securing millions for clean energy and prioritizing our clean air and clean water. And I also want to thank the various coalitions in Washington state, labor allies, community allies, folks from the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy and others who have really been doing the hard work of figuring out how we come together on some very, very difficult issues, because it is really important that we ensure that we don't have false choices or false equivalencies, whether it's on the moral front in Charlottesville or whether it is right here in talking about jobs versus the environment. That is just not the right framing, and it is really important that we all push back on that. So thank you for doing that. You can clap for that. Jeff Johnson's clapping for that. Now, in my experience as a woman, an immigrant, an organizer, because that's been my background, I'm a community organizer, have been, and will continue to be in the United States House of Representatives, the only woman of color in the state Senate when I was there, and now the first Indian American woman in the U.S. House, and the first person of color in the Washington Democratic delegation to the United States Congress. And it's because of that that I deeply and personally understand the politics of division and the remedies of the politics of intersectionality. I like to say that I'm not a woman on Monday, an immigrant on Tuesday, a worker on Wednesday, and a mom on Thursday. I'm all of those things all of the time, and I'm going to fight for all of those things all of the time. My experience is that the most formidable movements are created when we join forces and build our power together, recognizing that hierarchies of oppression never benefit us, recognizing that some groups and communities are disproportionately burdened and need more help just to get to the same starting point, and recognizing that it is often more complex to build coalitions and find solutions that work for everyone. But the surest fire way to lose is to try to go it alone. So in the wake of 9/11, when I founded the immigrant advocacy organization Hate Free Zone, now called One America, we began with the goal of fighting hate crimes and civil liberties abuses against Arabs, Muslims, and Sikhs in a post-9/11 world, and perpetrated by the Bush administration, most powerful government in the world. And we built our power through organizing and coalition building, but it was not easy. And after 9/11, I can tell you that I could hardly find any elected officials who wanted to visit a mosque or stand up for Muslims. But through building labor, diverse community, and faith coalitions, we were able to grow our power and move the collective conversation in the direction it needed to go. Leading the largest voter registration drive in the history of the state, registering 23,000 new American citizens to vote, suing the Bush administration around deportations and winning, and fighting for comprehensive immigration reform, and instituting some of the best darn policy in the country around immigrants and refugees right here in Washington state. But we also realized that that wasn't enough, that we needed to speak out not only on what was seen as immigrant rights issues, but on immigrant rights issues like collective bargaining rights in the workplace, to work with our labor brothers and sisters on wages and paid safe and sick days, because immigrants are workers. And that's why I'm proud to have been on the committee that passed the $15 minimum wage in Seattle. And I think my first bill that I introduced in the state Senate was the raise the wage bill. We didn't get it in the state Senate, but we got much better at the ballot. So thank you, Washington, all the people that worked to make sure we got a higher minimum wage and paid safe and sick days there. And we did the same thing on marriage equality, recognizing our immigrant LGBTQ leaders and their wisdom. And we've made great strides because of people in this room on preserving our planet and addressing climate change, which is, again, as I said, it's very difficult. And none of this work happens overnight, and it's not always easy. And I'll be honest and say that it has taken dedicated work, time, deep dialogue, collaborative strategy sessions, and evaluation to get to the point that we're at today. Strong leaders in communities of color had to stand up and demand to be at the table in crafting solutions, pointing out over and over again how communities of color are disproportionately burdened by the effects of climate change. Strong leaders in the environmental community had to stand up and show others in the movement why we needed to broaden the decision-making table. And strong leaders in the labor community had to demand that we don't just say the words just transition, but that we actually invest the dollars and the time to make sure that the jobs we create in this clean energy economy are strong, good, union jobs in the places where we're losing some of those jobs. That is not going to be easy. And for each of these leaders, you can clap. Just be loud when you want to clap. I'll stop. For each of the leaders, there was a real risk. There is a real risk. And I know because I've had to do it in the immigrant rights movement, of alienating our own bases, because not always are our bases with us. on these questions. And so standing up because it's the right thing to do, but also because we know that it is the only way to really build strong and lasting power that can take on the great forces that we have to take on. So you all are here today because you understand better than so many that the intersectionality of the fights we take on is actually what makes those fights worthwhile. And you know that for any one of us to succeed, we have to fight for all of us. The Blue-Green Alliance embodies the very essence of these values in action. From your work in states across the country, working towards a just transition from fossil fuels to a clean energy economy, to your participation on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Alliance is leading the way. You also understand better than anyone else that choosing whether or not we want to commit to a renewable clean energy economy is not really a choice. It is the only option. We all understand that for our communities to thrive, we have to create jobs that are good for workers, good for communities, and good for the environment. And I am doing everything I can in Congress to use that platform to build the movement. It has been horrifying, to say the least, to watch the climate deniers and the biggest corporate polluters taking over our country. We will fight the proposed 30% cut to the EPA just as hard as we fight all the attacks on collective bargaining. And by the way, instead of calling it the EPA, I really think we should call it the Agency for Human Health, Clean Air, and Clean Water, because we need to make it tangible to people. But one of the hardest things that we have been fighting are the administrative changes that are being made in rolling back regulations from the Obama administration and stopping science from coming out through threats and intimidation. And just one example is particularly relevant in the wake of Hurricane Harvey and Irma, and that is the rollback of the Obama-era regulations around considering flooding and sea level rise when building infrastructure. It is an insult that that regulation was rolled back, and now that we have seen in Texas and Florida the devastation of those hurricanes. But in addition to being an opposition party, and those of you who know me know that I'm always at the front of a fight, I'm ready to take on as the opposition party, I also believe we have to be a proposition party, right? We have to propose our vision of what the world looks like, and then we have to be willing to fight for it and call people into that fight. And that's why I'm so proud to be one of the original 4 co-sponsors in the House of the 100 by 50 bill that Senator Jeff Merkley has led in the Senate. We just had a wonderful conversation with him. This is not theoretical. We can do this. We can get to 100% renewable energy by 2050, but we have to do it right. And the bill lays out that path with investments in good jobs and communities of color, in rebuilding a green infrastructure and electrifying the grid. And we all know, because I just went and saw this wonderful demonstration here by the IBEW, that there are more jobs in solar than there are in coal, and Trump voters in coal country, according to polls, do not want dirty coal jobs. What they want is good union jobs in their place of residence, and that's what we have to work for. And I'm also proud to have created with my colleagues Don McEachin of Virginia and Nanette Barragan of California, new members, the United for Climate and Environmental Justice Task Force, to lift up environmental justice and communities of color and low-income communities who are suffering across the country but must be the center of climate change efforts. And we've introduced legislation and policy that codifies the Office of Environmental Justice at the EPA and in the Oval Office, the very things that Scott Pruitt is decimating. And we're proposing grant funding to transition all public transportation to zero emissions while keeping costs low, incentivizing the installation of solar panels for low-income families and community solar projects, and doing it together with workers, unions, grassroots leaders, tribes, nonprofits, and government leaders. I want us to be sober, though, and take a moment, determined and clear-eyed about what we're really discussing here. Climate change that is induced by humans exists because someone is making a profit by borrowing from the longer term to serve their shorter term. Many corporations that benefit today, without regard for the downstream climate effects of their actions, are not inclined to modify their practices. Now, there are some enlightened folks and corporations who do get it or are beginning to understand, but there are still many who obstruct progress, and they are being represented very well in Congress by fierce climate deniers and by lobbyists whose very livelihoods depend on keeping people from acknowledging the real threats and challenges before us. And it is a great sign that we have labor, environment, and community advocates coming together, but to build the movement that will propel our legislation to become the law of the land, we have to bind ourselves together by our methods even more than by the content of our proposals. Environmentalist Naomi Klein, who's a good friend, and I discussed this movement building when I was interviewing her for her new book in DC. She calls confronting climate change our great opportunity to rebuild. She proclaims, and these are her words, our economic model is at war with life on Earth. We are not just tackling climate change as if that weren't big enough. We are recalibrating how we interact, distribute resources and costs, and most importantly, how we decide who makes these redistributive decisions. Is it the private sector, increasingly dominated by fewer and fewer super large corporations based on profit motivations? Or is it governance by the will of those who will bear the costs? And if it is the latter, then we will have invented and invested in a new model for ourselves along the way. Brothers and sisters, we have to embrace and be willing to fight for what one of my heroes, Mahatma Gandhi, termed satyagraha. Satyagraha is the principle of the insistence on truth. We must bind ourselves to one simple principle, that we're all better off when we're all better off. Simple. And we must remember that we are strongest as a society when we reject fear and scarcity and we embrace generosity and abundance. It is the power of love, love that is focused, determined, positive, and yet willing to take risk when necessary, that will win every time. We will need to call people in as much as we call people out. That means finding a place where we can agree, some human values that bind us together, and then educating each other on what we disagree on. And we need to give place for people to change and grow, including ourselves. And yes, when we need to, we will call people out, including for racism and sexism. So Representative Dawn Young, this lady knows a damn thing about what she's talking about. And by the way, it didn't get much attention, but what I was opposing him on was predatory hunting practices on federal parks lands. And I was saying that that's not a states' rights issue. They are federal lands and therefore subject to federal regulation. So it was about the environment and preserving our parks. Our movement is strong, but we have to build even more strength, and we have to involve people around the country in every community and bring street heat to the fight. Because if politics is the art of the possible, then our job as organizers, whether in Congress or in the streets, is to expand the boundaries of what is seen as possible and to allow space for people in Congress, people in business, people in our communities to do the right thing. And we have to create space for everyone to own that challenge as their own. That means we don't just go to people when we want them to say something or do something, but we actually show up for those fights, like the fight for Dreamers right now, 800,000 young people across this country, and we have to show up and allow space for leadership. So let me end by saying that it does take time. It does not happen overnight. No great movement in the history of this country, whether to end slavery or whether to fight for the right for women to vote, has ever been easy. And if it were easy, it would be done. So brothers and sisters, thank you for everything you've already done. Thank you for everything I know you will do. I will be right there building power with you every step of the way. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeff Johnson, President, Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO Co-Chair, Washington Blue-Green Alliance.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Pramila. Incredible. What a congressperson. So look, I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Jay Inslee. I met Jay for the first time in 1989. In 1988, he ran from the state legislature from Sela, a little town just up the hill from Yakima. And so in 1989, back then I'd had about 3 years in at the Labor Council, and I was their legislative director. And so I got to meet Jay for the first time, and I had the typical issues, worker comp, UI, stuff like that. But then I brought up a farm worker issue around unemployment insurance for farm workers, because at that time, farm workers in our state were excluded, for the most part, from unemployment insurance benefits, minimum wage, and other things. And so I said to Jay, it would be so important for a Democrat from the Yakima Valley to be supportive of this. And without blinking, he said, of course. He then went on that summer. He invited me to come over to Sela to visit him and to see his part of the world, and I did. And that was the first time any legislator had done that, had opened themselves up like that. Jay, of course, went on to represent the 4th Congressional District in Congress, then went over to the west side of the state and represented the west side in Congress, and of course became governor. So look, in the 31 years I've worked for the council and been in this state, I've worked with 5 different governors, and they're all unique, but I like Jay the best, and not just because he's the current governor, but he's the most personable of them all. And I want to say this: I served on his transition team with about 1,000 other people, but he did something pretty unique. So we worked hard on these different committees, making suggestions, and then he said, "What I'd like you to do, a homework assignment, is write up, kind of like a wish list for me, directions on what to do once I become governor." He said, "You have, it's a 1-page limit," and I took it very seriously. I had my 1 page. I used the smallest font I could find and still read. I made it single space, right? And I had all this, all this wisdom was pouring out of me, just pouring out of me. And at one point I said to him, look, you are such a climate warrior, and it's my goal to help bring the labor movement along in this struggle, and I want to support you in this, so let's work together and think about this and brainstorm together. And then at the very end of the piece, I said, look, if you and Judy ever get tired of, eating the food there at the governor's mansion, come on over to our house for a home-cooked meal. We live in Olympia. Well, he took me up on the first. The second one, I'm still waiting to feed you guys dinner. But the other thing that's unique about him, I remember one of the first meetings we had, it was a diverse coalition of folks around the table, and Jay comes in, and, most governors say, get down to business, and he says, let's go around the table. What was your first car? And I was like, whoa, what, really? And it was just a beautiful way he transitioned into making people feel comfortable. You're remembering something fun from your past, and then you get into the issues. The other thing I most respect about this governor is he has an incredible love for the state of Washington, its people, the environment, the mountains, the streams, the Puget Sound, and he's a active outdoors person, and he combines that passion, of course, with the passion to fight climate change. He takes this very seriously, and I don't know anyone who, every day wakes up trying to think of how do we combat climate change, how do we create a better environment for not just the people of Washington State, but for the planet, and how do we do that in a way that we produce high-quality jobs. Since he's been governor, he's had a tough run in the sense that he's had a divided legislature the whole time, right? That's kind of unusual for Washington State, and so everything that we've gotten, he's had to fight for. Big transportation package that should have passed the first year that was introduced took 3 years, much of it to the governor's fighting and insisting that we do this large component of mass transit in it, and he had to swallow a bitter pill because the Senate Republicans put in a poison pill that banned any movement on clean fuel standards, and if he tried, they would take away the mass transit funding. And I know that had to be a struggle for him. And he did the right thing. He signed the bill, largest transportation package in the history of our state. We will get those clean fuel standards one way or another. He did put out clean air rules. He's created a carbon emission reduction task force. He has been our leader on climate issues, and he's a terrific guy. So with that, the governor of the state of Washington, Jay Inslee.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank Jeff. You laid on a little thick there, pal. You got to take it easy. Jeff, thank you for your leadership. You have done so much for our state in so many realms. I really appreciate a labor leader who has been so effective in the Blue-Green Alliance. What you and Leo Gerard have done. How about a round of applause for Jeff and Leo and the great work that they've done. I want to thank Senator Merkley, Representative Jayapal for what they're doing. We are in a great alliance with them. I just want to get this off my chest. I can tell you this. For every brain-dead idea coming out of the EPA and the White House in Washington, D.C., we've got 10 brilliant ideas to defeat climate change and climate disruption and grow jobs in Washington state. I can tell you that right now. And I want to talk to you about that. I want to welcome you. This is a huge honor that you would do this in my state. It's a beautiful morning. You're in the state with the best paid family leave policy in the United States. You're in a state which was the first state to defeat Donald Trump's attempt to embolden a hate-filled, non-welcoming policy. We're the first state to beat him in court. We're proud of that. We're not done in that regard. You're in the state, interestingly, which has been on the forefront of building jobs while defeating climate change. And this is a state that has blown up the argument that defeating climate change and clean energy is bad for your economy. You're in the state with the first state with a limit on carbon pollution adopted by executive authorities. The first state in the country that has had that. It's one of the first states that has a clean energy research institutes that are research institutions. You're one of the first states to have a clean energy company development policy. And guess what you get when you aggressively defeat climate change and aggressively help job creation? According to CNBC, you get the best state in the United States to do business. And I am proud of that. So we got a lot of things to be proud of in the state of Washington, but I'll tell you why I think this is the most beautiful morning to be in the state of Washington is right off to my left. We have not just the future of job creation in the United States, we have the present, the today, this hour job creation in the United States, because right over here off to my left, we've got 6 apprentices through an IBEW apprenticeship program that are getting ready to grow jobs in my state and defeat climate change. Thank you, IBEW, for what they're doing. And I look forward to meeting them in this mobile apprenticeship program. And I want to tell you, to me, none of the issues around clean energy jobs or climate change are hypothetical or some kind of gauzy abstraction that we've dreamed up and we put on a bumper sticker. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Yesterday, I flew back from a tour of our fires that are decimating our forest fires. We've had 3 years of some of the worst forest fires in Washington state history. We've had unprecedented destruction of our forests. How about a round of applause for our firefighters right now that are fighting these fires across the western state? So we've got this unprecedented explosion that's decimating our beautiful forests across the western United States, frankly, at the same time the hurricanes are blowing in the south. So I flew back yesterday. I'm doing a tour, and I looked down and I remembered something that happened 3 years ago. I had gone to just north of Ellensburg, Washington, to look at the then fires of 3 years ago. And I'd looked at these fires that had burned right up to the edge of our wind turbine farms. And I just saw the scorched earth right underneath the wind turbines, and it just kind of clicked for me. You had the fires caused in part by climate change, which is making droughts more prolonged and rising temperatures and allowing beetles to overwinter because the winters don't get cold enough to kill the beetles, and they eat the forests and decimate them. And they were right at the base of the wind turbines. And I thought, this is like a alpha and omega, cause and effect. Fires at the base of the wind turbines, which is a system of defeating climate change by using our high-tech system to build a clean, renewable energy source. And I'm kind of proud that we're doing that because we've got the cleanest grid. 75% is zero CO2 emitting grid-based energy in my state. And I'm proud in 2006, I helped many of you in this tent pass our renewable energy portfolio standard that developed the wind turbine industry in the state of Washington. And one of the reasons we have the best economy and why we have so many great jobs in this state. So anyway, I was standing at the bottom of these wind turbines, and Trudy was taking a picture. I wanted to take a picture of this. And I saw this shiny white pickup coming down the road. And the pickup stopped, and I just started to talk to the driver, and I said, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm maintaining and help build this wind turbine farm. And I said, what do you think of this? He goes, let me tell you what defeating climate change means to me. And he pounds his hand on the hood of the pickup. It means a shiny pickup truck in my garage. That's what defeating climate change means to me. And we're seeing that all across the state of Washington, where the building trades built a site in Moses Lake, Washington. You know, we're the largest manufacturer of carbon fiber in the world today that goes into electric cars. It's in Moses Lake, Washington. And I love the thought that carpenters and machinists and electricians built the largest production facility for carbon fiber that goes into electric cars. That's in the state of Washington. I'm proud of that. So this is not an abstraction for me. It's a real thing, and it means real jobs for real people. So I'm here to announce what I call the fourth law of thermodynamics, or fifth, depending on how you count. The fourth law of thermodynamics is that for every ridiculous, backwards action coming out of Washington, D.C., there's an equal and opposite good idea coming to Washington State. Okay, so this is the fourth law of thermodynamics. And I do think one of the beauties of this alliance is that it has recognized that we can achieve economic justice and economic equality at the same time we're preserving this great place for our grandkids. And we are doing that. I'm happy that by the end of this year, we're going to have on the street a process improvement rule so we can assure the safety of steel workers when they're working in our refineries and the like. And I'm proud that we're doing that. I'm proud that we increased our minimum wage in the state of Washington, one of the first to move forward. We are combining economic justice, and it is an economic justice issue. I'll tell you why I say that. I was on the banks of the Duwamish River. That's right next to the original place where we built B-17s in World War II in Boeing. So it's a very large industrial center in the south of Seattle. And I met a woman named Jasmine, a young woman. She was about 14. She and her partner had done some research about the incidence of asthma in their neighborhoods. Of course, they're exposed to a lot of the industrial activities and also transportation. There's heavy transportation corridors through her neighborhood. And she independently had gone out and looked at the incidence of asthma in her neighborhood in these areas. And what she found was the incidence of asthma doubles, I think it's just about doubles, every quarter mile you get closer to these industrial sites in these transportation corridors. And these are kids, and she told me, this made an impact on me. She told me she was 12 years old before she met some kids who didn't have asthma. And she basically showed that we know who's breathing these toxic fumes. It's working people who are working in these areas who are the lowest income people. This is a justice health issue. So when I think of defeating climate change, I think of defeating asthma in these kids who are in the lower income in our communities. Won't it be a great day when we defeat climate change and asthma in the United States? And I'm dedicated to that, make sure that we do this. So how do we do that? Well, here's a couple things I want to say. First off, defeating climate change, building clean energy jobs can no longer be a peripheral part of our discussion. It can no longer be something we kind of add on of what we talk about. Maybe we mention it during the presidential debate. Defeating climate disruption has to be a fundamental tenet of what we do, and I'll tell you why. I'm tired of declaring an emergency every summer because of forest fires. The fact is we are in an emergency situation the entire rest of the 21st century, and it's time we start talking about this and making sure it's in every single one of our conversations. And I'm going to make sure that we do that on a national basis. And I believe that. It means that we form alliances everywhere we can. And I've been very active with my fellow governors, Governor Brown of California and Oregon, the premiers of British Columbia. I've spoken. It's interesting. About 2 months ago on a Thursday, I spoke to Prime Minister Trudeau, and the next day spoke to the leadership of Mexico in 2 days. So we got to look for every alliance that we can, and in fact, we're doing that. And I'm proud that governors are leading on this because the states are stepping into the breach with the vacuum of leadership coming out of the White House. I'll be in New York here in the next few days talking to the United Nations. We need to step up to the plate. Now here's the good news, and there is good news here. When the President of the United States ran up the white flag of surrender against the threat of climate change, not one single nation who had signed the Paris Agreement joined him by going backwards. If anything, he inspired the rest of the world to act with greater commitment, and I'm happy about that. He's joined only 2 nations, Syria and Nicaragua, in the loser caucus, who wants to lose in the great battle of climate change. This nation is going to defeat climate change with or without him, and the governors are going to lead and are leading in this regard. So I'm happy about to be able to say that. And we're acting. We're acting in the state of Washington. I told you we have a cap on carbon pollution. I put it in as an executive order pursuant to our state clean air law. We're moving on energy research. We're moving on incentives for the adoption of solar power. We're moving on incentives. We're built for people to be able to buy electric cars. We're putting in more electric charging stations so that we're moving in my state, but we got more to do. I'm looking for the next legislative session, and I hope we have at least one more senator who's interested in climate change legislation. The voters will have a chance to make a decision on that. I'm saying this on a nonpartisan basis, of course. But we're looking forward to the next legislative session. Look, I'm going to close by just saying thank you for your individual leadership. Everybody's a leader on this. Everybody has a chance to be a leader on this. Everybody has a necessity of being a leader on this. Because there is no greater challenge or opportunity for anybody to help their community than on this challenge. And on these days when we have a climate denier in the White House, on these days when the fires are burning and the hurricanes are hitting, It can be daunting to us. But I just want to tell you, I think we have to have the attitude of Winston Churchill during the Blitz in the 40s. In the midst of the smoke and the darkness and the threats and the fear, you know what he said? He said, these are not dark days, these are great days. And I think that's exactly our situation right now. These aren't dark days to become discouraged or depressed or passive or inactive. These are great days where we got to double down our commitment. We got to talk to everybody in the labor movement to make sure they understand the stake in this. We got to make sure that everybody in the environmental community, in the economic justice community, make sure that they're allied in this regard. These are great days where we can do more for our grandchildren in today's jobs than in any other single issue. Let's keep this ball rolling. Let's defeat climate disruption. Let's grow jobs by the thousands. Let's win this thing. Thanks a lot. We're going to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Kim Glass, Executive Director, Blue Green Alliance, President, Blue Green Alliance Foundation.
Well, hello again. Thank you so much, Governor Inslee, for those powerful and inspiring words in your call to action to each and every one of us. So I'm here to give concluding remarks and to give some public service announcements. And I know I'm the one that's standing between our box lunch and our tours today, so I will try to keep this short. But as any good summit, this wouldn't have happened without the collective energy of you coming and attending the summit. So thank you to each and every one of you making time out of your lives to attend the summit. And I've been remarking with staff that it's been so encouraging when you have the bartender last night several times saying, "This is last call, this is last call, and this is last call," that we were all still talking to one another. And I feel like the energy of this summit was one of collaboration, really talking to people we didn't know across the movements and figuring out pathways forward. And I really hope that those conversations continue long beyond just this one summit. I want to also thank our sponsors. A summit doesn't come together without a lot of sponsorship, and I really appreciate all those folks are noted in the program, but really appreciate the support we receive. And I would be remiss to not thank some of the key staff and the others who have been part of the Blue Green Alliance who helped pull the summit off. So if you can bear with me for a couple minutes, I want to thank Stephanie Selt, our Washington State Policy Coordinator. I also have a few folks on the BGH staff that I want to acknowledge: Linda Nielsen, Jen, who you met when you were registering, Mike Williams, Eric Steen, JB Tango, for their roles in making this event a success. And I also want to give a special thanks to the Summit Advisory Committee, and if you could bear with me a moment because I could clap for each and every one of them. Barbara Bird, the Secretary-Treasurer of the Oregon AFL-CIO, Pedro Cruz, the Senior Infrastructure Representative from the Sierra Club, Robin Everett, the Organizing Manager for the Sierra Club, Anna Fenley, the Legislative Representative for the United Steelworkers, Casey Golden, Senior Policy Advisor for our Climate Solutions, and our co-chair here in Washington, as well as Jeff Johnson, President of the Washington AFL-CIO, and Larry Williams, Jr., the Labor and Coal Coordinator for the Sierra Club. Let's give everyone a round of applause. So I hope through this summit, there's very rare opportunities. The collaboration that's taking place here in Washington should be replicated more strongly throughout the country. I know the Blue-Green Alliance is sort of new to Washington, and it really was a conversation between Jeff Johnson and Casey Golden and JB and others to say, how do we build on strong relationships here and move forward together? And, you know, I often think of the great work that you're doing out here of collaboration beyond just the labor and environmental movement with the environmental justice community as something that should be replicated in other areas of the country. And I was really inspired to hear a lot of the stories during the breakout sessions around whether we were talking about carbon markets or energy efficiency or transportation, that collaboration is very meaningful. And I think when we get to know each other and understand where we're coming from, there's a lot more that we agree on than we disagree on. Blue Green Alliance was founded in the vision of Paul Wellstone in Minnesota, and he said a quote that I've used so many times, but I think it really matters. And he said, "We all do better when we all do better." And that's something to keep in mind. So as we're thinking of our climate goals, we need to think about the workers and the communities that are affected by the transition, but not just transitioning to some job that doesn't exist, but really ensuring that those industries are making their products here in the United States in the cleanest possible way, with the least pollution possible, and a real investment in our infrastructure and the industries here. And I'm really excited about what is happening here in Washington State and what's happening on the West Coast. And I will use a lot of the stories and the legislative pathways and the regulations that you're thinking about as a way to sort of talk about these issues in the industrial Midwest. Too many people have felt left behind in the clean energy economy. In fact, I would not be remiss to say that there's a lot of those companies in the clean energy industry don't want a union. So for our environmental partners and our allies in the environmental justice community, to the extent that you're having those conversations with the renewable energy industry or the battery storage manufacturers, you know, please keep in mind that there's a lot of union members who want to work in these industries, and please help those union members. And I know Jeff mentioned that the other day. And for folks in the labor community, you know, to keep an open mind of where we really need to go on some of these climate challenges that are going to affect generations to come, and how do we get there. And I think when we all keep an open mind together, that collaboration will continue and will be a stronger partnership together. So as you leave this summit, I call upon you to continue the work. I hope you build on these relationships. And please feel free always to reach out to us. We are a partner in convening. We are a partner in crime. We are a partner to try to build strength moving into the forward. And I really want to thank each and every one of you for coming and making this summit a great success. So. Thank you. So the most important announcement for today is where do you pick up your lunch? So just so folks know, I know the tours are about to start. There's buses going to 2 different places, but in the lobby there's boxed lunches. So feel free to pick one of those up as you're heading out. And again, thank you all so much.